just the calendar itself. And when I found out that the theme for the Women's History Month was the rites of passage, resurrecting principles and values of African people, we need to ask, well then, where do we look in Africa to do this? Where in Africa can we find the model in which to develop this, our principles and values and our African way of life and our worldview? If we wanted to choose a particular African nation, a tradition, a culture that has a worldview to use as a basis for reconstructing an African worldview, I am here to suggest tonight that we look at Kemet, that Kemet is our most logical choice. Kemet is our most logical choice because in Kemet, what we have is a long tradition of written history, written facts that are verifiable of a very ancient African civilization, an ancient uncorrupted African civilization, with enough data to verify it and enough data to use for reconstructing not only our history, but our social reality, not only the history of the world, but the social reality of the world as well. Any other African nation to be used as a singular choice would not be as complete as Kemet and would not be as incorrupted or would not be without corruption. For example, if one were to choose a particular nation in Africa or cultural group to identify with, which is something that we often do here in the United States. For example, let us say that we chose the Yoruba nation to identify with that, to find in ourselves a way of life and cultural traditions and a worldview with its orishas and its rituals and its divination and its customs and its traditions. We cannot say that one particular group in Africa can truly be reflective of all of Africa, can truly be reflective of the worldview, the way of life, the culture, the traditions, the rituals, even the spirit of all African people. Each African nation has its own specific traditions and customs, rituals, and belief systems. And if we chose, for example, the Yoruba to be the basis of our spirituality and to look there for our African traditions and a way of life for the future of African people, it would not be the same as for the Kikuyu. It would not be the same as for the Maasai. It would not be the same as for the Dogon. It would not be the same for any of the 250 other peoples of Africa. There's a great diversity in Africa. There are over 250 different languages, which means that there are over 250 different cultural groups in Africa, each with their own traditions, their own customs, their own rituals, their own belief systems, their own patterns, cultural patterns, and their own way of life. Yes, there is a great deal of commonality between them, a great deal of commonality. And one of the things that Cheikh Anta Diop gave to African people was the searching for the commonalities among all African peoples and nations. But for as many commonalities there are also as many differences. Another problem with modern-day African cultures is that they're all young. They are chronologically young. Most of them have developed out of nations that were destroyed and developed out of the destruction of much older African nations and older African cultures. And the people had to disperse and start new ones. And therefore, they are not full and complete as they once were. They have lost a lot of their old ways, and they have become corrupted. Now, what do I mean by corrupted? What I mean by corrupted, what corrupted means is that in the passage of space and time, they have lost their original way of life, or much of their original way of life. They have lost much of their understanding of their ancient cultural thought and cultural patterns. And because of that, We need to look beyond modern-day African nations and look for something where the corruption is not there. Also, this is one of the main reasons why Africa is the way it is today, because much of what we think of our African worldview and our African way of life has actually been lost and really no longer exists. So we need to find something in Africa that represents the commonality of all Africa, something where the corruption doesn't exist at the level that it exists in our modern-day African nations. And Kemet is the one place that offers the best source and the most data where we can actually go and research and study Africa as it was in a purer form, in a healthier day of growth and development. And we have a way of doing that, and the way we have of doing that is through the study of Medu Neter. Medu Neter is the language of Kemet, and I'm going to talk a little later on about Medu Neter. But Medu Neter is a writing, or it's the language of the people of Kemet. It's an African language, and in the language of Medu Neter, what we have are thousands, literally thousands of books that are written on every subject imaginable. We have books that are written on the history of Kemet, the history of Kemet written by the African people themselves. We have books on medicine, lots of medical papyri talking about all kinds of medical practices, internal and external medicine and herbology, etc. We have books on all of the sciences, all of the forms of mathematics, and all of the books on astronomy. The Kemites had recognized and named all of the planets and all of the stars, and they had studied the skies extensively. We have books of poetry and literature and drama. We have books on every subject that you would have today. We have biographies and autobiographies written by people which tell us how the people lived, what their life was like, what their worldview was. We have accounts, and I could go on and on with this for hours, so I'll stop there on that. But I think you get a picture that we have much written in Kemet, much written data on which we can rely on for our understanding of an ancient, uncorrupted African civilization written by African people themselves. And not only that, they left for us instructions. First of all, instructions to read the text. They left instructions for posterity. They even described the white man, and they described who he was, where he came from, and they even left predictions for us about our future and the future of the world. So much is there in Kemet, written in Medu Neter for us to learn. And that is why Kemet is so important and talked about so much today among people. Let me talk, before I begin talking about Medu Neter specifically, let me talk for a moment about some of the things that over my many years of study of Medu Neter and Kemet, I have discovered in the text. And the things that I want to mention tonight are the things that I feel can help us to move into the 21st century, can help us to develop that African world view that we seek to develop, and that can help us to establish those principles and values that we need so much. Some of these are, and I'm going to go through each one of them rather briefly, and we can bring it up later on. The first one and the most important one, I think, is the concept of Neter that we have in Kemet. Neter, if you wish, you could say Neter or Neter. In Medu Neter, which is dialectical in its spoken language, it really doesn't matter how you pronounce it, whether you pronounce it Neter or Neter or Neteru or however, really doesn't matter. In the writing, it's the same, no matter how it is in the spoken form. Neter is, in the text, seems to be the totality of all existence. It seems to be that everything that exists is Neter. And I say that because in the text, it says everything that is, all different kinds of things are referred to as Neter. Man is called Neter. Plants and animals are called Neter. Stones and rocks and trees are called Neter. Concepts and principles are called Neter. Rivers, the sky, everything is called Neter or referred to as Neter in the text. And so therefore we get the feeling that neter is everything that exists. Nature is neter. All living things are neter. And even nedu neter, the name of the language of neter, the language of nature, the language of all existence, of all life, is the name of the language itself. When it gets translated into other languages, it gets translated as God. But however, in nedu neter, there isn't that concept of God. There isn't the same God concept. Neter and the God concept in the Western world are really two very different things. God is a singular entity, a creative force, if you wish, or an overseer of human life and a singular developer of human life. And according to whatever different religion or form of spirituality you believe in, God has its own variations. But for one thing, God is not the same as neter. Because God is not a tree, God is not a stone, God is not man, God is not a river, or God is not the sky. But neter is man. I am neter, you are neter. This podium is neter. Everything that exists is neter. The Kamites believe firmly that everything that exists is sustenance for everything else, that all life sustains life. And therefore, everything is divine. Everything is holy. Everything is revered, because everything is sustenance for everything else. And in order for existence, for life to exist in the healthy, creative, developing form that it exists in, everything must be protected. Everything must be taken care of, and in order to keep and maintain the balance and the healthy existence of everything else that exists. So that is what neter is. We talk about neteru. The neteru are all of the various manifestations of light. We are all neteru. Everything is neteru. Even though some of the neteru are named specifically because they are so important or considered important in the element of creation. For example, we've all heard about Set, Ufir, Heteru, Nebehet, Shu, Ma'at. Those are all principles and concepts. Principles and concepts. Jehuti. Jehuti is the principle and concept of learning, wisdom, and knowledge. Ma'at is the principle of harmonious balance in the universe. Aset is the principle of womanhood. And Ufir is the principle of renewal, rebirth, and rejuvenation. They are not gods. In Kemet, they were not worshipped as gods. We cannot talk about gods of the Egyptians or gods of the Kemites. They were never human forms. They were never worshipped or given praises to or praised. As a matter of fact, we always say when we're learning nedu neter, one of the things you see right up front is that it's never spoken of as neter being praised by man. So therefore, these are not gods, but these are neteru. These are principles and concepts in the development, in the cosmology, in the cosmogony, in the creative process of man. The creative process, which itself is felt to be a continuity or a continuous happening. It was never conceived in Kemet as something that happened in the beginning as God created the heaven and the earth. But it is something that is continuously happening all the time according to our ancient texts. And not only that, but there are many, many cosmologies and cosmogonies.
Yemhotep, Anku Jasaneb. I am very glad to be here, and thank you all for coming out to hear my presentation this evening. Duawu, duawu, duawu. Can you hear me? Because I have a mic on? No. Okay, let's start again. Yemhotep, Anku Jasaneb. Yemhotep means come with satisfaction. Anku Jasaneb means life, prosperity, and health to you all. Thank you. Duawu, duawu, duawu. That's thank you, thank you, thank you for having me come out this evening to Detroit to talk about the book of Peret Imheru. That topic was chosen for me by the Detroit Study Group, and since you had been listening to Brother Ben Levy talk about the Bible and the Quran, I guess they thought that it just would follow that we would also talk about one of the sacred books from Kemet. So it's an exciting book, and I'm sure you all are curious about it. So that's my topic for this evening. I have a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to be showing as I talk along, and I actually forgot my PowerPoint, to put my PowerPoint presentation on my flash drive, and so the geniuses of technology here fixed it up for me so that it would work. One second, just gonna. The book that I'm going to be talking about this evening is called The Book of the Dead by Wallace Budge. I said that because many of you have perhaps already read this book, owned this book, tried to get through it in reading it and trying to understand it. I'd just like to see a show of hands of how many people have actually attempted to read this book or have this book.
Where's the transmitter? Where's the transmitter?
It's in the back.
I'm not trying to make
Okay.
See if it's go ahead.
Okay, is that good? Yes. Wonderful. Just wonderful. Dua. Okay. So most of the people in the room have actually either owned a copy of this particular book by Wallace Budge called The Book of the Dead, or have perhaps looked at it in the library and tried to read it and understand it. So what I would like to do this evening is try to shed some light on what the book is really about, the meaning of the book, and the purpose of the book. That's the most important thing, the purpose. What was it used for, and could it be of any value for us today? The book is very old, first of all. The book goes back thousands of years, and by that I mean at least 10,000 years before Christ. The book is found in the early periods of Kemetic history, early dynastic if you wish, and it's found written just chapters or parts of it on the pyramid, in the pyramid texts, inscribed on monuments and inscribed on papyrus, and in a lot of different places, just individual chapters. And throughout the historical period, these chapters are put together by people to make a larger papyrus, which we can call book. This literature is obviously very important because it continued to be read and used from about 5000 BC all the way to the end of Kemetic history. It was used continuously for that long. And we are still using it today. We still read it today. So for that many thousands of years, this book has been very special, and that's why we really need to take a look at it and pay attention to it and see and ask ourselves what was so special about this book. The book is written in Medu Neter, for those of you who may not know that. Medu Neter is the name of the language that was spoken by the people in the Happy Nile Valley over 10,000, for about 10,000 years before Christ, and actually even longer than that. Whenever, when I say a date like 5,000, 10,000, 3,000, no matter what thousand date I say, one of the things that I always have to reflect upon is when I read other people's history, when I read the history of Native Americans, for example, they say their history goes back 26,000 years that they have knowledge of. When I look at the history of the Chinese people, they put their history back 15,000 years. Everybody puts their history, dates their history and the knowledge of their past in the double-digit thousands, except us. when we struggle with trying to deal with, should it be 3000 BC, should it be 4000 BC, should it be 10,000 BC? We struggle with something totally ridiculous, and everybody else on the planet pushes their dates back very far. And I know that they are not, well, they may be, but they probably are not as old or have as old a civilization and culture as the African Kemites did. So think about that next time we quote dates. I'm not going to talk about all of the different versions of the Book of Coming Forth by Day. I think I want to just kind of get into it, but I need to start by saying, one, it is not the Book of the Dead. It is not the Book of the Dead. It's nothing about death in this book, even though Wallace Budge and others call it the Book of the Dead. It is actually about living, and it's actually about the living and living and living again in the next life. It has nothing to do with death. That's the first thing we need to know. And I'm going to show you the title of the book and the papyrus and all of that in a moment. So let's just, in Kemet, there were no holy books like the Bible and the Quran. That's important. There were no holy books like the Bible and the Quran. This is not a holy, well, it is not a book like the Bible or the Quran. In other words, it's not a book that you should pick up every day and think it's going to teach you how to live a better life. It's not that kind of a book. There were no religious doctrines in ancient Kemet. So, for example, in the Bible we have religious doctrines like the Book of Laws and the Proverbs and the laws in particular. There's nothing like that. This book is not that. This is not a religious doctrine. There were no written laws. As a matter of fact, Kemet itself didn't have the kind of justice or judicial system that we're used to in the West. They did not have any written laws.